All right, folks, welcome to the Gritty Podcast. I am your host, Brian Call, and I am back with my brother, Brent, the Gritty Broman. How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
Still sick.
Still a little sick.
But we're jumping into the next chapter anyway. I'm getting blazed right now with my Mountain Ops blaze shot. Shameless plug. Check out Mountain Ops. Go to mountainops.com and use the code Gritty. This is Energy and Focus lemonade, and Brent has already drank one.
I was going to say, I hope you weren't asking what my flavor was because it was down the hatch. It didn't even look.
Brent fell asleep on the couch a minute ago, and I could hear you snoring. You look tired.
Yeah.
So we're getting blazed. So we're alert, and then check out Stealthy Nutrition. Over there, one of my things I've been using a lot lately is the electrolytes.
Mm-hmm.
The electrolytes are legit, super healthy, clean, no sugar, like very little garbage in that stuff. It's super clean. And then, of course, CBD oil, Stealthy Nutrition CBD oil, gun covers, rifle covers, all that helps out the lampers, helps out Gritty, helps us all win. So we appreciate that. Check it out. Use the code Gritty over there at Stealthy Nutrition. Okay, so let's do this. Chapter 17 in the River of Doubt. We're going to go back to our Theodore Roosevelt story. We're going down the River of Doubt with the expedition that was ill-prepared and has had a death, and it's getting gnarly.
Mm-hmm.
So
I think we're at chapter 19.
You're right. I meant 19. Chapter 19. So now Lobo, Rondon's dog, is dead.
Mm-hmm.
And now we are...
and now we know for a fact that there are Indians about.
Correct. Yes. And
super friendly, knife or dog shooting Indians.
Things have gotten sketchy.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. All right. The wide belts. But roughly 2 million years ago, humans had spread out of Africa and into Europe and Asia. Hundreds of thousands of years later, they migrated to Australia and New Guinea, which were then connected as a single continent. Because they did not yet have boats and could not endure the cruel cold of Siberia, tens of thousands of years more passed before the humans crossed the Bering Land Bridge and made their way into the Americas. When they finally began to populate North America, however, human beings quickly dispersed throughout the continent and, by crossing the Panamanian Land Bridge, soon reached South America, and some 12,000 years ago, they entered the Amazon. It's a long roundabout course.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's not how I'd like to travel.
I mean, it took a while.
Just a couple thousand years.
So from Africa, around the Horn, around the top, through Siberia, through Alaska, the Bering, the bridge, and then through the Panama Canal area, and then boom, South America and Amazon. All right. Let's see here. In the eyes of the rest of the world, the humans who reached the Amazon basin virtually disappeared. For thousands of years, there was no further contact with the Amazonians, whereas most regions of the world continued to change and interact to form new peoples and nations by fusing races and cultures. The inhabitants of the Amazon remained insular and isolated. Even in 1500, when European explorers began to land on the shores of South America, claiming the land for themselves and their kings and enslaving its aboriginal inhabitants, the continent's vast interior remained untouched and its people unknown and unreachable.
Still unreachable. People still don't want to go to the Amazon.
It's gnarly. After the Spanish explorer Orellana, I nailed that for sure.
For sure.
After the Spanish explorer Orellana finally penetrated, I found a way to say it 3 different ways. Penetrated the Amazon basin in 1542, he returned with startling tales of dense jungles, deadly poisons, and most astonishing of all, a tribe of vicious women warriors. The expedition's chronicler, the Dominican friar Gaspar de Carvajal, described the women as going about naked, but with their privy parts covered, with their bows and arrows in their hands, doing as much fighting as 10 Indian men. Aurelina named these women the Amazons after the famed women warriors of Greek mythology who were said to have removed their right breast so that they could more effectively shoot a bow and arrow. It is from the Greek word Amazos, or no breast, that the word Amazon is derived.
I did not know that. No breast.
Yeah, who would have thought? I didn't know that either.
I did not know that's what that meant.
I knew they were from Greek mythology, but I didn't know that they were Amazos, or no breast.
Amazos.
Interesting. So, yeah. So he spreads this tale of these fierce women fighting as, doing as much fighting as 10 Indian men in this place. So interesting. After Aurelina, few outsiders disturbed the Amazon's native people for the next 200 years. In the mid-18th century, however, things changed dramatically and, for the Amazon's human inhabitants, disastrously. While traveling down the Amazon River from Ecuador, the French naturalist and mathematician Charles Marie de la Condamine saw natives extracting a milky substance from a tall tree. After the strange liquid, which the Indians called
Get that one right.
Cauthoque, had coagulated, it was used to make everything from boots to bottles. This explorer saw potential in
Caoutchouc?
Look, it's rubber, okay? And brought a sample with him back to France. When the strange pliable substance made its way across the channel, the British soon discovered that it worked extremely well as an eraser, and so began referring to it as rubber. By the end of the 18th century, rubber was well known and widely used throughout Europe and the New World. By the middle of the 19th century, the Amazon was exporting more than 150 metric tons of it each year.
Wow. Those Brits, man.
La Condamine's discovery meant great wealth for a few South Americans and Europeans, but nothing but sorrow and terror for Amazonian Indians. Settlers who had made their way to the Amazon in the hope of making their fortunes in rubber quickly became frustrated by the death of willing, cheap labor and began to organize slaving expeditions. Already laid down by European diseases, many Indian tribes were nearly decimated by these expeditions. Those Indians who survived were perhaps even less fortunate than those who lost their lives. Rubber barons were notorious for treating their slave laborers with exceptional cruelty.
That sounds like a condom brand. Get your rubber baron on.
Julio Cesar Arana, the son of a Peruvian hat maker who made millions of dollars harvesting and selling Amazonian rubber in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, ordered his men to go into the rainforest with rifles to recruit Indians. The tens of thousands of men, women, and children whom they rounded up were shackled into chain gangs. If they did not make their quotas, Arana's men would burn them alive, hang and quarter them, or shoot off their genitals. During the 12 years that Arana held his reign of terror along the banks of the Rio Putumayo, the native population plummeted from more than 50,000 to less than 8,000.
Jeez.
Those who survived did so with horribly disabling and disfiguring wounds that became known as La Marca Arana, the Mark of Arana.
Jeez. Okay, I'm starting to see a little bit more of what's-his-face's point here.
Whose point?
Rondon. Couldn't think of his name for a second.
Yeah, Rondon is a fierce protector of the native people and what they had to go through. Look, this is just evil. Mm-hmm. This is again, he's a Spanish explorer, Julio Cesar Arana, Peruvian, the son of a Peruvian hat maker. Uh-huh. So Spanish. Mm-hmm. It's just women, children. You'd have to be the sort of person that sees individuals as subhuman. Mm-hmm. When you look at what people have done over the ages with the other, the others. When you other other people, you can justify all sorts of things. When you become that tribalist, they're below human value. That's why, the thing where we say all men are created equal. We're saying that all men, regardless of race, creed, gender, whatever, sex, everyone has equal value in the eyes of God, or we're all sons. This is your Western Judeo-Christian value system coming into play when you say all human beings are valuable because they're all sons of God. Mm-hmm. When you start adopting that worldview, you start seeing people differently. You couldn't justify this behavior.
No.
Because these people have intrinsic value just because of the spark of deity that's inside them, because of them being just by virtue of being a human. Mm-hmm. And you don't see them as something less than yourself or something that you're justified in exploiting. It's just evil. What this person has done is evil. So he just decimated their population from 50,000 down to 8,000. What a horrific experience for these Native people to go through at this time. So yeah, when you talk about conquistadors, Cortez, those Spaniards were especially vicious. They did tend to have
a ruthlessness. Like, wasn't it Cortez that burned his own ships?
Yeah, I think it was.
Yeah, he landed. And he's like, "Don't be expecting to get out of here easy," and burned his own ships.
I don't remember. Sounds familiar. I need to brush up.
He didn't want the people to be able to run away and stuff, and so he took away their ability to run away.
Yeah. The Indians' only advocates were the missionaries who had already established themselves in the Amazon by the early 17th century, searching for souls to save. They made an effort to protest their charges, but they were powerless against wealthy and merciless settlers such as Arana. Their best hope came in offering the Indians as wage laborers instead of slaves. The settlers, however, reverted back to slavery when they found that they could not get as many laborers as they needed and did not have as much control over them as they had over their slaves. Even imagine that, like if we threatened to burn you alive and put you in a chain gang, you'll work harder than if we give you the option to work or not for penny wages.
Weird.
It's like, even the missionaries themselves wanted to force the Indians into reductions or missions in which they were made to wear clothing and worship the Christian God. Before Rondon's Indian Protection Service was established in 1910, and even after, the Indians' best protector was the Amazon itself. So dense and dangerous was the rainforest that few white men were able to venture very far into it, even for the promise of rubber. Despite the intense search for Indians by the men who wanted their labor or their souls, several tribes had not yet had any contact with the outside world by the time Roosevelt reached South America in 1913. Even those who had some limited contact with outsiders were so isolated by the jungle in which they lived that they did not have even the vaguest understanding of what the rest of the world looked like. Such isolations makes it well nigh impossible for them to grasp the significance of large communities, George Cherry observed. The distant villager is incapable of picturing a much larger group of human beings living together than that in his own tiny settlement. They picture the rest of the world as one of jungles, great rivers, and vast seas, with here and there tiny pools of humanity no larger than their own. Thus, it is that they look upon the stranger from afar as a traveler between villages. They don't have any concept of the Arizona desert or
the Grand Canyon.
Yeah, or anything like that. Like it doesn't even exist. It was funny. I think when I was in the 90s in high school, I saw they had discovered this never before discovered community in the Amazon. Even today, I think they still find
there's pockets of people
that are like
yeah,
never ever seen by human beings before. I mean, this is in recent days. Can you imagine? Like we have all of our modern technology and all the stuff going on, and yet there's a group of people in the Amazon that are still living like they did thousands of years ago and have no idea. Their struggles are utterly different than ours.
I think that is almost as weird as like those tribes where you go down there and they have like Adidas on and like a t-shirt and stuff.
Yeah,
They're hunting with a stick bow.
Yeah.
The world's crazy.
Like on those Meat Eater episodes.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Where he brings a compound and they're like, what
the? Yeah.
Okay. The mysterious Indians who surrounded Roosevelt and his men on the banks of the River of Doubt were so isolated that they had never seen a white man. The intersection of their world and that of Roosevelt and Rondon was not simply a clash of different cultures. It was a collision of the Industrial Age and the Stone Age, the modern world and the ancient. Known by modern anthropologists as the Cinta Larga, which is Portuguese for wide belt, a reference to the strips of bark that they wrap around their waist. This tribe had remained shrouded from the rest of the world, not just by the impenetrable rainforest, but by the very thing that had exposed most Amazonian Indians to settlers and missionaries, a river. For European soldiers, South America's rivers had long been the only highway into its interior. It had been along the Amazon River and some of its thousands of tributaries that they had discovered the rainforest and its occupants, and the Indians had discovered another world beyond their own. Some Amazonian tributaries, however, were so rapids-choked that they were impossible to ascend and too dangerous to descend. The River of Doubt's fierce rapids had dissuaded even the most determined settlers from exploring its course. The same rapids that had already cost the expedition the life of one man and had nearly robbed Roosevelt of his son had kept the Cinta Larga in a time capsule, which had been sealed for millennia. While the world in which Roosevelt lived had undergone dramatic recent changes, including skyscrapers, automobiles, and even airplanes, Orville and Wilbur Wright had made their first successful flight over Kill Devil Hill 11 years earlier. The Indians in this region were still using the simplest of tools. Their axes were ground and polished stone, and their cutting tools sharp slivers of bamboo. They made their fires by drilling a hard stick of wood into a softer one. The men all carried their hard drills with them while they were out hunting so that they could start a fire. No matches. Just a fire starting kit out of wood.
You ever done that?
Yeah.
It's awful. It's awful.
It takes a while, doesn't it?
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, I've made fire out of sticks, and you got a little bow and a string, and I've done it that way. This whole hand thing, that ain't going to work. Yeah, that's it's really interesting to see primitive ways that they do that, though. I mean, it's doable, very doable, and it's something that we should all practice a little more of. SE Knives had this outdoor school that they would help people build fires with out of nothing, basically. A couple of tools and you can just make fire. Think how critical, life-saving that is. There's a few YouTube videos on it that are pretty cool to watch. It's been a long time since I've done it, though.
Or
I bring a whole bunch of
what?
trioxane and serious 5 lighters, and I have a lot of fire.
How would they say, man? There's nothing cheaper than a big lighter. Just stash them all over the place.
Okay, back to the book. It says, so cut off from the outside world that when they first saw the expedition, they were not even certain that Roosevelt, Rondon, and their men were human. By this point in their journey, most of the men in the expedition had grown rough beards, which looked strange and animalistic to the Cinta Larga, who, like all native Amazonians, had little facial or body hair. After watching the men from the shadows of the forest, the Cinta Larga mothers warned their children to sleep close to the fire at night so they would not grow a patchy layer of fur like these strange creatures.
That's awesome.
Look at you.
Oh, yeah. I might fit in pretty well with them at this point.
The beard thing, it's so interesting how hairless native...
Why is that?
I don't know. Genetic, evolutionary thing. When I was in Japan, I was a missionary in Japan, and when I was there, they're hairless too. I mean, they can't really grow a beard much. It's the rare guy that does that. They're way different. I think because we probably have some Neanderthal in our blood, and they don't.
Yeah, it might make some sense. Yeah. Neanderthal, Brian.
Yeah, whatever.
Tall.
The STHEALTHY must also have been curious about the expedition's canoes. As simple and crudely made as they were, the dugouts represented a level of technological sophistication that was unknown to the STHEALTHY. Although they lived on both sides of the River of Doubt, fishing from it, drinking from it, bathing in it, and traveling long distance along its banks, the STHEALTHY had not yet conceived of boats, even those as simple as the expedition's dugout canoes.
That's crazy.
The only means they had developed for crossing the river were simple rope and plank bridges.
Nope.
Nor, despite their dependence on the river, had they yet developed the means of fishing with a hook and line, relying instead on spears or arrows to kill the fish that were so central to their diet.
I don't see how that's a dig. Have you ever tried catching crap with a hook? That sucks. Give me a net.
I don't know. I mean, they're both effective ways to do it, I guess. One is you can leave it just hanging there, baited, and leave, and then come back and you've caught one. You don't have to sit there with your spear at ready. But I saw Ranella do that poison the water thing, and they all float to the surface, and they're kind of numb.
And they just pick them up.
And didn't they do that in this book where the guy's tongue got bit off by the
they
piranha?
Poisoned all the piranhas.
Was it poison, or did they dynamite it?
I don't think it was dynamite.
Stunned.
I think they put some kind of
poisoned it.
They mushed up some roots, threw it in the water to this big pulpy thing.
Look at us. We haven't read it in a while, and we're like, we already forgot.
Brian, we are experts.
But
the Amazon.
he put that fish in his mouth, and it bit his tongue off. Look, that's a stupid thing to do with a stupid end result. Like,
he got what he was asking for. There had to have been a part of him that was like, hopefully.
Dude, why would you put mouth to mouth, though, too? Like,
I cannot think of a reason to put a fish in my mouth, Brian, period.
Well, they were hungry. Despite these limitations, and in part because of their isolation, the STHEALTHY were masters at surviving in the jungle. During their portages, the men of the expedition crashed through the underbrush, scaring off game and announcing their presence to the Indians. Even when they did not have to wrestle with their dugouts, the men found it nearly impossible to fight their way through the jungle. Long vines crisscrossed the forest. Sharp branches caught their loose clothing, snagging and ripping it and holding them hostage while they struggled to get themselves free. In contrast to Roosevelt and his men, the STHEALTHY moved through the rainforest quickly and silently. They wore no clothing, and so were able to slip through the tangle of vegetation unrestrained. The women, who wore their hair long and parted down the middle, had nothing on their bodies but necklaces of black vegetable beads, which they strung around their necks, wrists, waists, and ankles. But for a simple liana covering to protect their penises, the men were similarly naked. The STHEALTHY were also fast and invisible in the jungle because they had blazed trails that an outsider could not possibly discern or follow. Even if Rondon, in his ardor to make contact with the unknown tribe, had started down the STHEALTHY trail that he had found in and out of thickets, crisscrossing the river and going over rather than around any obstacle they encountered. The tribe's trails were marked, but ingeniously so. Markers appeared only once every 12 or 18 feet and were simply small branches that the blazer had half broken and then bent backward. To anyone but a STHEALTHY, these markers were indistinguishable from any of a million other broken and bent branches in the rainforest. A change of direction was indicated by nothing more than a slightly larger broken branch, whose bent end vaguely pointed the way.
I'd be hosed.
It's a time past, you know. Mm-hmm. We have paved sidewalks, trails.
And people can barely still manage to get around.
Only the STHEALTHY knew, moreover, that the markers also showed the direction to and from their camp. In a system like what they used in modern maritime navigation, markers were placed so that when approaching the tribe's camp, they appeared on the STHEALTHY were as skilled at hunting as they were trailblazing, while the men of the expedition slowly starved, wandering through what seemed to be a lush but empty rainforest. The Indians saw, heard, and smelled game everywhere they turned. Their ability to move soundlessly through the forest also helped them to sneak up on their prey as the members of the expedition never could, and their skill with a bow and arrow was uncanny. These Indians were such expert hunters that they were able to trick their game into coming to them. As Rondon had learned when they lured him with the recreate nearly any animal call.
Oh, okay. So they baited Rondon.
Maybe. In fact, so familiar were they with these calls that they used them not only to draw game with striking distance, but even to express time. When referring to a time before sunrise, for example, they use the cry of the howler monkey.
Bizarre. I guess that's one way to keep track of time, but...
One of the greatest frustrations that the men of the expedition faced on the River of Doubt was that they were descending a river crowded with fish that they could not catch. Those same fish, however, were easy prey for the Cinta Larga. The Indians made up for their lack of poles, lines, or hooks with the type of fishing basket. Milky liquid which the Cinta Larga extracted from a vine by pounding it with a rock. It stuns, or, depending on the quantity, kills fish by paralyzing their gills. Used in slow-moving inlets and pools, timbo allowed the Indians to spear or scoop up the fish as they floated to the river's surface.
Mm-hmm. Yep, we were right. Knew it all along.
To the crops that Roosevelt and his men did not. And they were willing to consume a larger variety of protein sources.
That means bugs. That's what they're saying there. Bugs.
The Indians grew vegetables such as...
There's protein everywhere, Brian.
The Indians grew vegetables such as manioc, yams, and sweet potatoes, but even they struggled to do so. Clearing the land in the jungle was grueling work. It often took a man with a stone axe an entire day just to fell a single large tree. A stone axe? He had to contend with the long tree roots that lay frustratingly near the surface of the soil. After crops and deprived of the cyclical nutrient exchange that had sustained it when it supported a rainforest, would become depleted, and the Indians would be forced to find
low if there's absolutely nothing.
No, they're living on what's dying that day.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's very little to be found. The rainforest is such a turnover of that's why when they log it and just clear it, you really can't grow crops on it.
You can't get, well, not only that, but once you clear cut the parts of the Amazon, they can't get it to grow back.
Yeah. All right. Each Cinta Larga village, which had one or two large houses that each held 3 to 5 families, was almost completely autonomous from the large taking the initiative and building a house or clearing a garden, but he was not their commander in the traditional sense. The Cinta Larga would not allow their village chief to tell them how to live their lives. Instead, the chief's job was to oversee the tribal ceremonies, an important role, because the Cinta Larga did not have a written language. Their only ceremonial guides were their own memories and the stories that they had heard their parents and grandparents tell. Interesting. So no written anything. Not only did the chief not command the village as a whole, he did not. Each man was the chief of his own family, which consisted of as many wives as he could convince to marry him and as many children as his wives could bear. A Cinta Larga man usually chose a new wife as soon as his first wife began to age. Girls were considered to be ready for marriage when they were between 8 and 10 years old, and they often married their mother's brother. In such small communities, a young man ready to take his first wife often found that there were no eligible girls left in his village. He was then allowed to take a wife from a man who had 3 or more, or failing that, he had to look for a wife in a neighboring village. It was not unusual for villages to trade women. The women, however, usually consented to the switch. Like women in most early cultures, the Cinta women did not have a voice in tribal or even family decisions. However, the Indian women did have a surprising amount of control over their own lives. For instance, if a Cinta woman was unsatisfied in her marriage, she could dissolve the marriage, she could marry another man, or she could even stay with her husband and take a lover. In such circumstances, a husband would usually look the other way unless he became the object of derision within his village.
Bizarre. What's the point of getting married then?
I think, yeah, it's interesting. As important as children were to the future of the village, they were far from coddled, and they were expected to take on the role of an adult by the time they turned 12 years old. Also, although the Indians lived together in 1 or 2 large huts, they did not appear to feel any particular responsibility for anyone outside their own immediate family. Each family had its own corner of the hut and its own fire. And when a man had been out hunting and returned with game, his neighbors rarely benefited from his good fortune. The hunter ate first, then his wives, children, and other relatives in that order. Yeah. What do you think, Brent?
They sound very tribal, on first, I don't want to sound too judgy, but that's just such a foreign way of living to me.
I mean, there's lots of cultures that have different... It's interesting how they didn't have any say, but then the woman could just leave and go marry someone else if she wanted to. Or just be like, look, you're not satisfying me. I'm going to have sex with this guy. He's going to be in my...
corner
from now on. And as long as no one makes fun of
what's his face,
her real husband, then she can just, that's cool. It's like, yeah. I mean, it wasn't like those women were didn't have some say in certain ways, right? Like they kind of were like, you're not for me. I'm going to go over here. That's why when we talk about society and you talk about men and women and you hear things like the patriarchy and things like that, it's like life's not, anytime there's a sort of a binary, like it's either this or that, when you boil complex issues down to just male oppression, it's like, dude, women and men have been partnering together. It's not like women are just slaves. Like there's a different role that each performed in a concert, in a partnership to live a life where they both benefited. The woman did what she could and he did what he could, but the idea that they're just slaves all these years and just do what men tell them to do, that's not accurate either. As is the case in here where she can just take a lover if it's not working out, or just leave her husband and go to a different one. World is just more, there's just so many nuances and there's so much more that goes into evaluating things than what people want. People want one reason that they have a problem.
They want to put it in no box.
Why does your life suck? One reason, because I'm female. Like, there's a lot. Or it's I'm an oppressed race, or my life sucks because I'm this one thing. It's like, it's so much more complex than that. It drives me nuts when people do that. It's sort of Marxist in the sense that you go down that road of there's the oppressed and the oppressor, and that's it. That explains everything.
No other options.
There's no other explanation for existence. It's just those with power and those without it. It's like there's so much left unexplained with that answer to everything. And when you start to see everything through that lens only, you can't get at the root cause of real issues because you're chasing a boogeyman. This is interesting, though. I mean, it's kind of setting some context for these people that they're in and amongst on this expedition. This is primitive tribes. You know, what's interesting is as we get into it is they know this stuff because the Cinta have their own history, and they kind of kept track of these first settlers that came through and what they thought about it when they first saw them too. So this legend of the Roosevelt expedition is perpetuated or told.
That's
throughout, later. Although Roosevelt and Rondon did not realize it, the Cinta strong independence was probably keeping the men of the expedition alive. Because the Indians did not have any traditional chief, they were forced to make all of their decisions by consensus. If it was time to move a village, for example, they had to agree on the time and the location of the move. When it came to dealing with the expedition, the Cinta were divided. Some of them believed that they should remain invisible to the outsider. Others, however, argued that they should attack. These men had invaded their territory, and there was no reason to believe they did not mean the Indians harm. By attacking first, the Cinta would have the upper hand. They would also be able to loot the expedition, which was carrying valuable provisions and tools, especially those made of metal. War was not a rare event for the Cinta The most common cause of death was death of one of their own was from an earlier attack or even from natural causes. Let me see that. Let me read that again. The most common cause of death of one of their own from an earlier attack. Oh, I see. What they're saying is that the most common cause of death was an attack from another person. That was even more likely than from natural causes.
Keep reading the next part. This next part's crazy.
The Cinta believed that death was brought about by witchcraft. If a man became ill and died, the others in his village never blamed the healer, a man who used plants and religion to cure the sick. Instead, they looked around their own village, and if they did not find anyone suspicious, they assumed that someone from another village must have performed the dark magic. The only response was to avenge the death by attacking the offending village.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to cause a problem. The guy gets, a virus and dies, and so we got to go attack the village. What do they do when they think it's someone in their own village? It's like Salem witch trials all over again.
You remember that episode of Meat Eater where he's got that South American guide, and the guy's trying to tell him that other peccary got sealed up on a mountain by the enemy village's witch doctor, and their witch doctor was too young, and he wasn't strong enough in his magic yet to release their peccary from the mountain.
I do remember now, like, if you guys go and watch the Meter episodes on Netflix, I think they're there.
Yeah.
That's right. I remember that. And he actually talked to a witch doctor dude, or medicine man, or whatever they want to call him. And yeah, they were explaining where the peccary had.
Yeah, because he's like, where are all the peccary?
I forgot all that. Yeah, I think there's other explanations. Again, when you draw conclusions on misguided ideas.
I don't know. Witch doctor sealing up the peccary in the mountains. Good as explanation as the next.
Yeah. All right, where was I?
War.
Yeah. So they went and attacked the offending village. The Cinta also occasionally went to war if the population of their own village had become so depleted by disease, murder, or both that they needed to steal women and children. Such attacks took place at night. The men would camp near the victim's village, and then after the sun had set, they would slip inside their communal hut. As the male members of the other village slept in their hammocks, the warriors would club them to death before rounding up as many women and children as they could find.
All right.
It's a different world, right? Like,
here's the thing. Like, I nenever think about dying in a hammock. That's the first time I thought about sleeping in a hammock and being murdered.
It's crazy.
Hammocks are for relaxing.
Well, we're just spoiled, man. Like in the modern world today, in so many ways. And
you mean by having locked doors?
Yeah, and not being murdered, not having our wives and children stolen from us because they ran out, because too many of them died. Although the Cinta rarely wore much adornment when they went to war, they dressed for the part. They would cut their hair very short, place hawk feather headdresses over their shorn heads, paint their bodies with animal and plant extracts, and hang bead necklaces from their necks. The most important item in the Cinta Larga's war dress, however, was the wide belt, for which the Portuguese would later name them. These belts were made from the Dietary tree, which was difficult to find. The men were sometimes forced to walk for several days in order to harvest the smooth, mahogany-colored bark of this tree. They wrapped an 8-inch wide strip around their waists 1.5 times and then tied it tightly with a fine liana. The stiff bark, which was 1/10 of an inch thick, was uncomfortable and often cut their stomachs and backs, thus exposing them to infection. But the belt was ubiquitous among the warlike Cinta Larga because it covered the abdomen and was so useful as a body armor. So if you get shot by an arrow, it might help prevent the penetration. Where's the belt? You're looking at pictures.
Yeah. Is that belt they're talking? Nah.
That dude is naked.
Yeah, I'm just seeing a lot of wieners so far.
What do they call it?
What is it called again?
Rarely wore much adornment. They would cut their hairs. They wore a wide belt. The belts were made from the Dietary tree. Right here. Cinta Larga wide belt. It's spelled like this. Coura. T. Yeah, tree. Isn't it funny how powerful the world is? We just want to see a picture of what they're talking about. And we can just look it up. No luck? I don't see it. Cinta Larga
belt.
Wide belt. These are more modern, huh? They may not wear them now because they don't stab each other all the time. Although they probably do. I don't know.
When they're saying a belt, I think it's literally just
They said it's 8 or 9 inches. So it isn't that thick.
No, it's not.
Let me see. What did it say? It's a wide belt. These belts, horse to walk. They wrapped an 8-inch wide strip.
Yeah.
That's it right there.
Yeah.
Although it doesn't quite look like 8 inches. Looks like 4.
Mm-hmm.
All of them look like 4 inches, not 8.
That one looks
there
a little
we
bigger.
go.
Yeah.
That one looks...
Still just a lot of wiener.
There's a...
What are these, penis sheaths that they have?
They call them a liana. Something like that. Liana? Okay, so anyway, folks, there's these belts. They wrapped an 8-inch wide strip. Although skilled with both clubs and poison, the Cinta Larga's most lethal weapons were bows and arrows. As Rondon learned when he examined the arrows that had killed Lobo, the Cinta Larga's arrows were exquisitely made and deadly accurate. Made from bamboo, the shaft was adorned with braids of peccary hair and topped with a knife-shaped bamboo tip. The arrows were, on average, 5 feet long, nearly as tall as the Cinta Larga men, and taller than many of the women, and were adorned with hawk wings or curacao feathers, which stabilized them in flight. The curacao looks like some kind of prehistoric bird.
Mm-hmm.
Looks like some kind of miniature peacock, miniature looking. I think they say they're kind of dinosaurish, super related to dinosaurs. They kind of remind me of an ostrich, mini ostrich with peacock plumage.
Yeah, they got blue skin
or something. I can't remember. They're dumb and weird though. Yeah.
Whenever I think of that bird, there's one in Fern Gully.
Is there?
Yeah, that's immediately what comes to my mind is that bird.
I don't even remember that show. That's definitely your generation. Let me see here. hawk wings, curacao, that stabilize these wings, these feathers rather, stabilize the arrows in flight. A 5-foot shaft. In Meat Eater, they were showing them fishing with those bows, and the arrow sticks out like 3 feet beyond the end of the bow, but they're super accurate with them. It seems weird to me that's the bow they came up with. You know what I mean? 5-foot long arrows. Strange.
Tropical turkey, Brian.
I know, it's a weird bird. The tribesmen made several different types of arrows for shooting fish, birds, monkeys, large animals, and men.
And men. Like how they threw that one in there.
But they used only one type of bow. About 6 feet long, the bows were made from the trunk of the peach palm tree and were so stiff and difficult to pull that it is doubtful that any of the men in the expedition could have used a Cinta bow had they found one. I don't know about that.
I get so tired of all these history buffs. The bows were so big and so strong, no one could pull them back. Then why did they make them? That happens. Oh, like the English longbow. If you go down a rabbit hole in the English longbow, it's like, we don't know how they pulled these things back.
I know.
They worked out. They exercised.
Yeah,
it was life and death to pull that thing back. They found a way.
I think, you spend a lifetime pulling a bow back, you're going to get stronger at it. But
there's the reason why people were called bowmen. Because that was their profession. That's what they did. They didn't do anything else.
But still, I don't buy it that they couldn't have pulled these bows back. What poundage are you talking? 60, 70, 80? Like,
some of these bows, Brian, they had like 300-pound draws on them.
Have you ever tried to pull back a 50-pound recurve or longbow? It's tough. And to hold the weight, you can't hold it for very long. You get up there to 70 pounds, it's just like, I get it. I get what they're saying, but I don't know. It says that they're 6 feet long, but they had these different arrows. Now, in the Meat Eater episode, they did show all the different tips because they would fish with some tips, and they would use these other tips for monkeys, and they had different broadheads basically for different uses. The most striking fact about the Cinta Larga, and one that would have alarmed the men of the expedition had they known it, was that these Indians were cannibals, Brent.
See, I told you, whether the dog came out or Rondone came out, all they saw was protein. Called it.
Unlike the type of cannibalism much of the world has come to know among desperate explorers, marooned sailors, and victims of famine, the Cinta Larga's consumption of human flesh was born not out of necessity, but out of vengeance and an adherence to tribal traditions and ceremony.
You ever hated someone so much you ate them? I haven't. I've never been that mad at somebody before.
The tribe had very strict rules for cannibalism. They could eat another man only in celebration of a war victory, and that celebration had to take place in the early evening. The man who had done...
You don't want to eat too much red meat at night, Upset your tummy too much. You might get indigestion.
The man who had done the killing could not grill the meat or distribute it.
He already did his share. He already did his work. It's someone else's time
and
to step
children
up.
and adults with small children would not eat it. If they did, the Cinta Larga believed they would go mad. Probably because some people had.
Yeah, I probably ate some uncooked
mad
human.
cow type stuff going down.
That reminds me of like the Aztecs. They wouldn't let virgins eat avocado because it was too potent.
The most important rule of cannibalism within the tribe.
Tell me, Brian, what is the most important rule of cannibalism?
Guess.
Chew quick?
Guess, dude, guess. The most important rule of cannibalism within the tribe was that one Cinta Larga could not eat another Cinta Larga.
So they could only eat non-Cinta Largas.
The tribe drew a clear distinction between its own members and the rest of mankind, which they considered to be other and thus edible.
So they're not Cinta Larga, they're just long pork. Goodness gracious.
An enemy killed during war, therefore, was ritually dismembered and eaten.
See, this is like how crazy humans can get. Like, we can rationalize anything. Literally anything.
I mean, when you're trying to live, you don't want protein to go to waste.
And I can see these same people being like, no, you don't eat dogs. That's not cool, bro. Can't do that. That's a pet. Mr. Jenkins across the street, though, he's been side-eyeing me a little bit too much lately.
The tribe drew a clear distinction between them and the other.
Good for them.
Any enemy killed, dismembered, and eaten ritually. While still on the battlefield, either in the enemy's village or in the forest, the Cinta Larga would carve up the body just as they would a monkey that they had shot down from the canopies. First, they would cut off and discard the man's head and heart.
Oh, because those are the bad bits.
Then they would section...
That's his thinking and feeling bits.
Then they would section off the edible portions, which are...
The hams.
The arms.
And the legs.
Legs. And a round of flesh over the stomach.
Okay, some pork belly.
If you're going to eat some human, look out for that.
Long pork, bro.
They grilled this meat over an open fire and brought it home to the village for their wives to slice and cook with water in a ceramic pan.
So they would pre-cook it and then bring it home?
Yep.
Interesting.
You don't want it to go bad.
I mean, what's the shelf life on human?
If Indians from other tribes were considered other, then the men of the expedition who did not even look human to the Cinta Larga certainly fell into that category.
They definitely look like long pork.
Like you said, protein. Moreover, should the Indians attack the expedition, Roosevelt would likely be one of the first targets. After watching the expedition, I just got that.
What?
Moreover, should the Indians attack the expedition, Roosevelt would likely be one of their first targets.
Oh, my gosh.
The fat, juicy old man with all the extra round bits. He looks delicious.
Okay, you don't want to be a fat guy at a cannibal party.
After watching the expedition for several weeks, the Cinta Larga had surely figured out by now that Roosevelt and Rondon were its commanders. Not only did they give the orders and do less physical work than the other men, but the camaradas and even the other officers clearly treated them with deference. Even if the Indians had only recently stumbled upon the expedition, they probably would have aimed for Roosevelt first, simply because of his substantial girth. The Cinta Larga often tossed pieces of a slain enemy into the jungle if they thought that he was too lean.
These guys are brutal.
Although Roosevelt had already begun to lose much of his 220 pounds to illness and the intense physical work and meager diet of the past few days, he was still by far the heaviest man in the expedition. If the men were massacred, the former president would make the best ceremonial meal.
You know, this Candace Millard, as she was writing this, thought that was so funny.
All right. There you have it, folks. That's today's story, Brent. Sleep well tonight.
I will, because I have guns, Brian. I have guns.
Thankful that you
and doors
don't live
that
in
lock.
the Amazon jungle. Interesting, right? Yeah.
So I just was looking up Cinta Larga cannibalism, and came across this. The Cinta Larga are not doing so hot at the moment. The current numbers of them are just down to a couple thousand. They have people coming in there and forcing them to mine diamonds. Yeah.
That's the latest update. We'll have to do
2017.
Do a little more digging into that.
There's a bunch of illegal mines down there, and there's some petition trying to get the... This is all BBC News, so I don't know.
Being exploited.
Yeah.
Do they have a donation button?
I didn't get that
save
far.
This into Larga? They might.
Probably not. They're just reporters, Brian.
All right. Well, that is the
Cinta Larga and the Curse of the Diamonds. That sounds like a Scooby-Doo episode.
BBC. They're always overdoing it, man. Those Brits. They just got to, throw the drama in there.
The group lives in the Roosevelt Indigenous area. Wonder where that name came from.
It says between the states of Rondonia and Mato Grosso.
Those all make so much sense now. How cool is that? We are
Rondonio.
experts on the Amazon.
Yeah. Now we know how Rondonio got its name. And the Roosevelt, what do they call it? The Roosevelt...
Indigenous area.
Roosevelt
How much you
Indigenous
want to
area.
bet they ended up setting up some little haven, just like they did up here, except for people.
It's interesting. All right, folks, that's it for today. Tune in next week as we continue the expedition down the River of Doubt. Next week or next episode, whatever comes first. And thanks for supporting the show. Use the code GRITTY over at Peaks. Get yourself some trekking poles and gaiters before the season hits. It's almost upon us. Goat knives. Use the code GRITTY GOAT
We should
over
wash
there.
this knife.
I know that one's pretty bloody. This is a fresh, clean goat knife.
Oh, nice.
Like I said, I like this one. Nitro V Steel. Check it out, folks. Use the code GRITTYGOAT. And use the code GRITTY. Get yourself some sheep feet. Get on them right now, though, because the sheep feet, they got to ship you the imprints. You got to do your imprint of your foot to get that custom orthotic built, and you need time to do that. So check that out. Go over there to Sheep Feet. I think that's it.
Yep.
Thanks for tuning in. Stay gritty.